the big lesson for me there was that you can only find your purpose while you're in motion. So the very first one is affirm your success. The second thing that I encourage everyone to do in the morning is to do something difficult. And the final thing that I recommend everyone should do in the morning is just find a bit of quiet space and write down 3 things that you will do to make today a win. So for me at that time, I felt like a malfunctioned human destined for the scrap heap. I was working alone at a liquor store of all places, dizziness, and then I vomited and passed out. I went from being barely able to sit into a classroom of 20 people to speaking on stage in front of thousands of people.
Hello, I'm Rich Christiansen, and welcome to Calm the Chaos, where we face the difficulties of life and look for ways that we can actually provide balance and stability. We can get ourselves in flow, resources and tools, and just any little insights that we can get out of the chaotic mindset that we tend to get in life. I'm so excited today to have a special guest with me, James Whittaker. Now, I've interviewed twice on his podcast, and James, just what a pleasure to be with you as we were arranging this. It was a lot easier this is not my studio. So I'm in James's studio, but a lot easier to come down here than have you fly up and see me in Utah. So thank you for being on my podcast.
Well, I'm grateful to you and for your friendship. 2 appearances on the Win the Day podcast for you now, Rich. So thank you for being an amazing light for the world.
Well, what an amazing interview you are. And anyone that hasn't seen this podcast, it's one of the epic, high quality integrity and content podcasts there is. And I just really love being on there. So now I get to flip it around, and you are so good at interviewing. Now I've really got to make sure I have my game up. You've just lived a remarkable life. You've been an executive coach. You've lived a big, full life, and you have a young family right now. You're kind of in the throes of with your wife in school and corporate career and trying to juggle everything. I'd like to start a little bit on personal. In Calm the Chaos, the first thing we always do is we talk about, what are some of the big challenges that you've had to go through? And if you wouldn't mind sharing just maybe a major challenge that just you thought you were going to get your hat handed you. And then I'd like to talk about how you navigated that, please.
Challenge is something that I've just experienced a lot in life, just based on the arenas that I've put myself in. So I've had the entrepreneurial journey, happy to dive into that as much as you like, but probably the biggest one for me going right back was when I was in high school and I started having these feelings of what I would find out later was debilitating anxiety disorder. And when you're young, I had a father who'd become quite successful in his career as I was going through high school, and I had an older brother who was performing very well academically. And I was someone who had no idea of who I was and where I wanted to go, certainly had no idea about my own values or value. And that just led to a lot of these just interesting situations of, in that time in high school where you're doing exams that they say are going to determine what university you get into, which is going to determine the rest of your life. And I just felt very overwhelmed in that situation. I didn't care about the food that I was eating. I was drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, hanging around people who probably weren't great for my self-esteem at that time. And it reached a point at the age of 23. So I made it into university by the slimmest of margins, by the university I wanted to go to. And I was just so disengaged because, again, I wasn't a good student because I had no idea of what I wanted for my life. And just everything seemed to be so hard for me, even though I had all of these advantages, like a loving family. I went to a good school. I had all of these advantages and just couldn't make it work. So for me at that time, I felt like a malfunctioned human destined for the scrap heap. And until one day I had a bit of a rock bottom moment when I was 23 years old. I was working alone at a liquor store of all places. And with this anxiety that I was experiencing, it would always hit 22 minutes into a situation that I felt I couldn't escape from. And so there I was looking at my watch, and 22 minutes into this, I was working in the store alone for the very first time on a Sunday morning, and those familiar feelings of anxiety and then, dizziness, and then I vomited and passed out, and I just woke up this absolute mess on the floor. And that was a moment. I remember I was driving home inconsolable. I had to call the manager on his day off, his only day off of the week. And there was only one person I trusted to share my feelings with, and that was my mother. And I said to her, I can't live like this anymore. What kind of life is this? And I had a friend who had something similar, and he had gone down the medication path of having, pills that would help him get through that seemed to work well for him. And my mum said to me, she goes, you have everything you need to succeed right here and right here. And she tapped my head and my heart. And that was the most defining moment of my life.
Wow. And I so appreciate, I just want to point out how much I appreciate, went right to reality. I'm really careful who I talk to because it needs to be in alignment with my value base, as we talked earlier. And rather than bring up some superficial thing, you went right to the crux of it. And the reality is most of us face demons and dragons in life. And they're very different. But James, I really admire and respect that. First of all, you went there. And then second of all, that you did look at it. So talk a little bit how you navigated out of that complexity. Thank heavens a mother was there to intercede in your behalf and someone you could really trust. And so honor and love to your mother. But how did you navigate out of that complexity? What was the path out of that? And what were the coping tools and mechanisms?
A big part of it was this understanding exactly what anxiety was. So I wasn't this broken person. There were a few rituals that I could follow that would enable me to show up as my best. So that was the first moment in my life where I planted a flag and said, it doesn't matter what's going to happen. Nothing's going to knock me off course. And that's when I began to consume everything that I could find on peak performance. I wanted to learn everything. So I dove into personal development. Any book on success. I literally subscribed to Success Magazine.
I want to back up just one second. You glossed over certain rituals or practices. I think it's pretty common to get in limbic now in this extreme case, but please share, if you would, what some of the rituals you found that helped you out as a teenager.
Breathing was the biggest one.
Yeah.
So for me, understanding that I couldn't pass out, which again, in a situation with this anxiety disorder, the biggest thing that I was afraid of was embarrassing myself by just passing out in this situation. Like how embarrassing would that be to be in an important meeting at work or a tutorial at that university to literally lose consciousness for no apparent reason. So when I learned that I could control that response through the breathing that I was doing, that was huge for me, because then as I went on to become a public speaker, I went from being barely able to sit into a classroom of 20 people to speaking on stage in front of thousands and thousands of people, like the MGM in Boston. And breathing was probably the biggest component of that, as well as this idea that I had control over my destiny. So I printed out a quote. It was from Aristotle that says, excellence, what is it? It was, there were two quotes. The very first one was about this idea that excellence is through a habit of daily action. I can't believe I can't remember the exact quote right here, of course, but that was a really, really big one. And the other quote was that life isn't about finding yourself. It's about creating yourself. Mm-hmm. So much of that really healing journey was about agency and doing some of those rituals like breathing and reading and sleeping well and eating well and focusing on my development. What was I doing to grow my mind and just increase my skills so I could add value to people who are higher and higher up the food chain, who would then take an interest in my development. And that's really when all these opportunities for the life that I'm able to enjoy today came from. It's because I developed specialized skills that enabled me to connect and add value to people.
And I just find it very interesting that you actually went from anxiety, crippling anxiety, to actually such a public figure in front of thousands of individuals. Obviously, you went right down the throat of it, and we talk about facing our fears with reality. You did that.
That's right. Yeah, and this stuff is very uncomfortable for me to talk about too. It's and
I appreciate you opening up on that, because there's not a week that goes by, James. There's not one week that goes by that from those that follow me reach out, and oftentimes the more successful, the more privately we suffer. And so I think it's really important that we show, that we struggled with this, and then what we did to, and it won't work for everyone. What worked for you? I'm also a breathwork guy. I love breathwork. It's the jam. But I know some people it's sacred movement or dance or prayer or walks in nature, whatever it is. We've got to find that. But I think it's really valuable for you to highlight what you went through. So what advice would you give to someone that is in that situation right now, crippling anxiety or just feeling completely debilitated? What advice would you give?
Create space. In fact, that's the thing that I work with people on the most, is anyone who feels like they're just, a lot of times our instinct is to run harder and harder on the treadmill.
Yeah.
And then you end up just completely burnt out.
Yeah.
It's like the only way I'm going to be able to get through this is to work even harder and even harder. And when you're doing that, then your family is going to be the ones who suffer, physical health, mental health, all those things suffer. And eventually you'll find yourself in that place of burnout. So that's not a good situation to be in. So the very first first thing that I like to do is help people create capacity in their lives. So if I was starting with someone right now, the very first thing that I would look at would be morning routine.
Yeah.
And if there were 3 things that I recommend every single person should do first thing in the morning, the very first one is affirm your success. So when you wake up in the morning, just say to yourself, today is going to be a great day, or I'm going to win the day, because our expectations tend to be fulfilled. So you might as well put something positive about how the day is going to turn up for you, because if you don't do that, then you're just going to fall into this stuff about, oh, I've got all these emails and then I'm sitting in traffic and all of these boring meetings, and you just got a whole lot of complaining to show for your day. So the very first one is affirm your success. The second thing that I encourage everyone to do in the morning is to do something difficult, something challenging. I love doing a cold plunge. It's always a difficult thing to do. So I sit in a 37-degree cold plunge. If I can't get to my cold plunge, I'll just do a cold shower at home. And it's just amazing. It's just the best way to start the day because you feel so good afterwards. But for other people, that might be going to do a workout. It might be meditation. For someone, depending on their physical condition, it might just be walking around their block. So doing something difficult to start the day is really, really powerful. It builds that resilience muscle, builds your confidence, and reminds you that you can do so much more than what you give yourself credit for. And the final thing that I recommend everyone should do in the morning is just find a bit of quiet space and write down 3 things that you will do to make today a win. No matter what, nothing else, those 3 things you will do. And most importantly, they're never related to the same thing. So don't write down 3 things related to your career. Maybe put 1 for your career, maybe 1 for your marriage, and 1 for your physical health or your mental health.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of Calm the Chaos. If you would like to receive more tools, frameworks, support, and resources, go to richchristiansen.com, and they're all there available for your free use.
So good. So good. We could keep going down that thread for forever, actually. So just to reaffirm, number 1 is to affirm.
Yep.
And now we know where Win the Day came from.
Yep.
Everyone needs to go check that out. That is an amazing podcast, maybe one of the favorite ones I've ever been on. And then the second is do something hard. You invited me a cold plunge this morning, so I couldn't be there. But it's amazing. If you have not done it, to spend 5 minutes in cold plunge actually reframes your... I need to quickly tell a story there. I was doing a cold plunge and a guy that did not fit was there. And I talked to him. He says, oh, I've been in so deep depression I couldn't even get out of bed. But I find if I do this, sitting here for 10 minutes once a week, I can function. So it's amazing what that does. And then number 3 is then 3 things we're going to do.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. We're going to make sure that we include those on the show notes. So now I'd like to navigate you through, because I know where we land at and end at, but I'd like to navigate how does a kid that is throwing up in a liquor store, by the way, would not have guessed that. I got dirt on you. How do you navigate from that into lecturing and motivational speaking on some of the biggest stages in the world?
Well, I went into the corporate world after that. So I spent about 10 years in the financial planning world, where I was eventually managing a team of financial advisors for a company that had about $2 billion in funds under management in Australia. And that was a great time, but I realized the only challenge toward the end of that phase, the only challenge was time. Like there's always more work. So working harder and harder is just going to stress me out. I wasn't learning as much as I wanted to learn at that point. So I felt like there were more challenges for me to go and do. So I left that town of Brisbane, Australia, where I grew up. I wanted just to put myself in an entirely new situation to prove that trajectory that I was on, to prove that I could make it. So I moved to the other side of the world. That was in Boston in 2012, where I did an MBA. It was 9 months in Boston and 3 months in Shanghai in China. And so many lessons from that. But the first one was that it really exposed me to entrepreneurship for the first time. I saw people my age and younger who were getting after it. They were talking about and brainstorming about business ideas. They were pitching investors, raising money. It was just such a cool thing. I just naturally gravitated toward those people because they spoke with so much passion and purpose. And that's what led to me then going and launching a lot of my own business ventures for the first time, where I was involved in, a social media brand, one of the world's largest CrossFit gyms, a weightlifting club, an activewear brand that sponsored athletes in the Olympic Games, the Commonwealth Games, and the CrossFit Games, all of these different things. And then eventually I became executive producer for the movie Think and Grow Rich, The Legacy, which was the very first time ever that a movie about Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill had ever been made. Wow. So this is the best-selling self-help book of all time, and no one had made a movie about it before. So I became on board at this project. It was already underway as executive producer of the film and author of the book. So that introduced me to organizations like the Napoleon Hill Foundation, Success Magazine. It allowed me to interview people like Bob Proctor and Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank, and Rob Dyrdek, who was a skateboarder who went on to have like 8 television shows and be an investor in all of these different companies. business. And along that way, it made me realize that helping other people is my career path.
Yeah.
So when I was in my mid-30s, for the first time, it was like I finally connected with what my purpose was. And a big lesson for me there was that you can only find your purpose while you're in motion. It's not something that you can find by sitting at home watching TV or just sitting on the couch. You've got to go out there and meet people and try a whole bunch of different things. And only once you've done that, you will find your purpose while you're in motion. And then interviewing all of these different people, it led to these 3 questions. The first one was, how do I meet these people more often? Because I just felt so inspired by being in their presence. So that was it. How do I meet these people more often? The second one was, how can I become friends with these people? I didn't want to just meet them once. I wanted to have them in my phone. So if there was anything at all that I needed, they were just a phone call or a text message away. And the third one was, how can I build my own brand in the process? And the answer to all 3 of those questions was to start the Win the Day podcast. And off the back of that, and all of my life experience and coaching CEOs and founders of all of these big organizations, I realized there that there's only so far that they can go if their team is not along for the ride as well. And I looked at the way that has typically been treated in organizations is that we look at someone as an employee and we don't even think about who they are at home. So what if you could combine that person at work as also one individual? What if you could bring they are someone at work, there's someone at home, they're one human. Let's bring everything back together and let's treat that human. And organizations would approach me to say, we have these big goals we want to achieve. Meta emailed me and they're like, we have these 10x bets that we want to achieve for the next year. How do we achieve that? So I go and work with these companies and say, well, a team is a collection of individuals. So the best way to achieve your organizational goal is to strengthen the individual who strengthens the team, and the team is what ultimately achieves those organizational goals. So that's what Win the Day does now.
Yeah, so fascinating that actually the very roots of where your challenge, the personal development, ended up taking you on this path. And I want to jump to the end, but before I do so, I want to pull back the thread back to here you are in high school. You're vomiting in the liquor store, and I'd like to talk through how did you make that transition though? Because obviously that wasn't easy. It's one thing that mom pats you on the heart and says you have what it takes, and you started consuming it. But there had to have been a transition period, and oftentimes that's when we slip and fall. And I'd like you to talk about that transition, and then maybe we can end on Win the Day and what you're doing now, which is so amazing. I'm so excited to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jim Rohn, he was a personal development icon, American guy. Jim Rohn, he's been passed so many years now, but Jim Rohn is someone that my father used to play when we were in the car driving to school. And it used to drive me crazy that he would play these personal development tapes. I'm like, why aren't you playing rock music like every other parent when they're driving their kids to school?
Sounds like a good dad.
Exactly. Now that I'm a father, I'm like, wow, what an amazing dad. What a great thing to do. So I would listen to these things from Jim Rohn, and I ended up finding my way back to that. Once I had that transition around 22, 23 years old, and I decided to get my life back on track, Jim Rohn was probably my biggest influence around that time. And there was something Jim Rohn said. He said, disgust can be a powerful motivator. And I remember I would look at myself in the mirror around that time, and I was disgusted at what was staring back at me. I was just this frail, unhealthy person with no direction, no motivation, no skills, who seems to have squandered every opportunity that I'd been given because I was busy spending my life blaming everyone and everything else for what I lacked. And I realized as I got back on track that just as I was, I used to lament that I didn't have all these things. Well, now that I had this new positive mindset, that all of these things were coming to me quicker than what I was losing when I was in a bad mindset. And I just became addicted to that thrill. So some of the big things for me were things like, like cutting out alcohol and cutting out smoking, which seems crazy to think that I was doing all that stuff on like a regular basis. Prioritizing sleep, reading books, like that was really the catalyst. And then I had another one where I sat down with an Australian speaker. We just had a coffee one day. It was the first time I'd ever met him. And, he was a paid corporate speaker. He would go to these organizations and he would do these great keynote speeches. And he said to me, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, I'd like to do that too. I'd love to go and speak at these organizations. And he said, I am speaking at an event later in the year. I'll let the organizers know that you're interested. And I was like, okay. And I didn't expect to hear anything. And sure enough, a few months later, the event organizers reached out and said that this guy, Sergio, has put your name forward and you're speaking at this event in front of 700 people.
Wow.
You can't have a PowerPoint presentation. There's no lectern, so no notes or anything like that. And this was my first official public speaking engagement. It was only for something like 15 minutes, but the thought of that was absolutely terrifying. But the feeling of
That's not normally how it goes down.
Exactly, yeah.
Remarkable.
That's right. The feeling of that, the moment I got off stage, is about the most exhilarating feeling in a positive way that I'd ever had.
Again, a hard thing.
Exactly.
And I really want to point out to the audience that so many of you actually have a struggle or have a challenge and maybe even have a little emotion of disgust. And we can actually use that as rocket fuel. And when we move towards that, it actually heals. And notice the language that James is using here, that he actually moved towards it rather than hiding under the kitchen table. And it's okay to have these vulnerabilities and weaknesses, because we're talking to one of the great corporate speakers of all times here now. So let's move towards those spheres, not away from them. So carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, Rich, a lot of times we talk about self-belief. And if we don't have that self-belief, then it stops us from action. But what we don't talk about enough is this idea of someone else giving us their belief in us.
Yeah.
So I had this individual who believed in me, which enabled me to get on stage. And that gave me that exhilarating feeling that completely transformed my life. And there's the famous quote about the mind, once expanded, can never return to its original dimensions. So all of us have this ability to give someone else who doesn't believe in themselves, we can transfer the belief that we have in them to help them start to take action, which can lead to them doing one amazing event, which gives them that exhilarating feeling. And then they become addicted to seeing how hard they can push towards their own potential. And that's how you change their life. And then their example enables that to go and help other people. And that's how we have this snowballing effect to transform the world.
And you've done that. Now, how much pull do you feel to that now, to pass it on? Are you feeling pull to pass it on and lift the net? I mean, a random event of some guy just randomly and inconsequential to him, but what did it do for the trajectory of your life? And so are you feeling that same pull now to pass it on?
Yeah, so much. And I mentioned earlier this Aristotle quote. I can remember what it was now, word for word. He was talking about excellence is not an act, but a habit.
Yeah.
So it's not just something that you do once. It's what I talk about with winning the day. It's not like you say, oh, I'm going to win the day for the rest of my life. No, it's a daily recommitment every single day. So to answer your question, it's shifted for me a lot since I became a father about 7 years ago. It started off where I just became so addicted to that thrill and wanting to change the world and wanting to be a billionaire and impact every single person on the planet. And then I became a father for the first time. And for the first 2 years of my daughter's life, I loved her so much and had this amazingly close bond that I've never felt before, but she felt like a hologram. And I think that was this self-protection mechanism that I had so much love for her that if anything were to happen, then my life would just disappear. So it took so long to have that feeling of being like, wow, this person is real. So being a parent for me shifted me entirely away from macro and wanting to change the world to be like, look, if I can't help my daughter be the best person that she can be, and the best way to do that is to lead by example and model the behaviors that I want her to have. An example of that would be, I don't want to yell at her, because if I do that, then all it does is show her that she can yell to solve her problems. So modeling the right behaviors that I want my children to have has been such a big thing. So I went away from all of these things about wanting to change the world, being like, none of that matters if the home isn't where it needs to be and if my energy is not where it needs to be.
Well, thank you so much for making that observation, because as we were talking earlier, the quote, no success in the workplace compensates for failure in the home. And the way that we fix the world is fix our country. The way we fix our country is by fixing our cities. The way we fix our cities is fixing our communities. The way we fix our communities is by fixing our tribe. The way we fix our tribe is by fixing our family. And the way we fix ourselves is by doing our work and facing our fears with it out. So you just summed everything up perfectly, and you actually modeled what that looked like. And I really thank you for that, how courageous of a life you've lived. Let's just jump 1 minute in. Anything you'd like to share without getting too personal of your family and your beautiful little daughter? It was a beautiful part of it. And then I'd love to jump to the end to win the day and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So right now, my daughter's about to turn 7 years old. It's been an amazing journey. My son is 4 years old. We've just reached the point now where I feel like we're getting out of the chaos and overwhelm we just have with young kids. It's such a beautiful place. A big lesson for me that I've learned recently is this idea of just continuing to take the kids to explore new towns. It's so easy to be able to stay in the one routine where eventually you feel like you're in a bit of a rut. And our house quite frankly melts down. We need to get out of the house to go into different things. And being from Australia and living in Los Angeles and having an American wife, when I became a parent, there were 3 things that I needed my kids to be used to. So this was my focus as a parent. My kids needed to be used to travel, because they're going to be traveling a lot. Noise, because I'm not one of those people that I don't want my kids to need everything to be perfect for them to fall asleep. I want you just to be able to fall asleep, but be very adaptable is what I'm getting at there. So
travel, to see your core values here a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So travel was the first one. Noise was the second one. And people. We're going to be around people a lot. It's just part of my life. I'm very big on socialization and a big believer in it takes a village to raise a child. And I just think the more experiences that we can provide for our kids, then the better off that they will be. So travel, noise, and people. That was a big focus for me as a parent. We got a little bit caught in it when our son was born, our second child, because, we had a few health challenges and just a lot of things, sleepless nights, a lot of things going on, and all that stuff is great now. We just had an amazing trip to Washington, D.C. I know you're a big believer and a great example of trips that you can do with your kids. So just more and more of that. And also with my wife too, we haven't admittedly done a great job the last couple of years of prioritizing time for ourselves as a couple. So we're looking forward to doing that.
You'll absolutely do that. And I'm glad that one of the 3 wasn't the Barbie. Yeah, just really beautiful. And I just really honor, it was so congruent, consistent. And I'm just pointing out that you saw how naturally some of the values flow, but it was really congruent. And just having that shared ethos of even those 3 things with his significant other, how much tension that's going to take out. And you already know what those kids are going to look like. So, and I got one piece of really good news for you and one piece of bad news is the sleep deprivation. You got a short break, but when they become teenagers, you're not going to sleep again for another.
I got a friend of mine who's got 5 kids, and I was having some. Who was a client of mine, and when my kids were going through those sleep challenges together, so my son was just not sleeping because he's always been 99th percentile for height and weight. Like he's a big kid, so he would eat so much, he would drink so much milk, which meant that he'd be spinning up a lot. He'd have a lot of that discomfort at nighttime that would make it very difficult for him to sleep. At the same time as our daughter went through a sleep regression where she was just very disobedient when it was time to go to sleep. She'd leave her room, and it's such a big challenge. If you have 2 kids that just won't sleep, it is a brutal phase of life to be in. And I spoke to my friend Phil, shout out Phil if you're watching, who had 5 kids, and he goes, I haven't had a good day of sleep in 18 years because since you became a parent. So I think once you accept that rather than fight it, then a lot of
that is true. I'm not the discouraging one, because that it's the ultimate joy. Yeah. There's no more depth and richness and meaning. But yeah, the good news is at our age, my wife and I really enjoy sleep a lot. We're catching up.
Yeah, exactly.
9 hours. That's a really good. That's a really good low water mark. I really appreciate that tender open up, and just is very obvious you're really a good, engaged, committed father. And there's so many different ways to do that, and just really great job on that. I would like to just end on win the day. I'm so captivated with what you're doing, and maybe this is jumping a little bit to the corporate side of things. But if you'd share a little bit more now about your programming, I know it's something I really deeply believe in is so many of the inefficiencies don't happen because of the logistical elements or the organizational elements. And if you're one of the individuals that follow me that have a company, I think this will be of particular importance to you. I've seen the profound impact that James does. And so I would like you to talk a little bit about win the day and your profiling process and how you're analyzing the impact it's having on companies, please.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. Well, the biggest challenge that I see for organizations today is this problem of overwhelm. You've got all these great people, but if they're overwhelmed at work and they're overwhelmed at home, how can you expect these people to be doing a great job for your organization? And of course, the stress that they're experiencing at home is going to have a massive impact on your bottom line as well. So in a lot of these situations, you have these organizations who say, why don't the individuals who work for me care about the organization's mission? Well, the truth is they don't care about their own mission because they are so overwhelmed. So a lot of these companies, what they're trying to do is push things like these values that the individual doesn't even understand, let alone believe in. And certainly they don't believe in the company's mission. So what I do is I come in and say, why don't we get them to care about who they are as an individual first? Mm-hmm. And once we have done that, then we can connect them to the organization's mission so everything lines up. A lot of times, your typical executive coach will go in there and focus on goal setting straight away. And I think that's a mistake. Yeah. The very first thing that I like to focus on is an awareness of where they're at and how much more potential they have to be able to give. Some people are in a bit of a challenging life season, like if you've just become a parent, or if you're caring for an aging parent or some other loved one, or you've got a medical condition, then you're going to be struggling a lot more, and you should not be marked down for that in the workplace. You should be given a bit of grace, but having that awareness enables you to say, cool, what are the actions and rituals that I can follow on a given day so I can show up a little bit better to who I am at my best? And that's really what the Win the Day program does. It helps people show up as their best a lot more often. So the very first thing that I do after that awareness piece is create capacity for those individuals. And once they create that capacity through things like morning routine, evening routine, then they experience momentum. And off the back of that momentum, then we can set goals. And that's the process I go through that I call designing an inspired life. And once you've got all of those things working together and feeding in a positive way so everything grows, then we connect them with the organization's mission. Then we have a look at who are the people around you that are not following the standards that you're setting and that you're abiding by personally. What are the boundaries that you need to set, and what are the conversations that you need to be having? And after we've done all of those things, which only takes 30 days, then we retake this win score assessment so we can measure how much progress that you've made. And then through that whole process, that's how I'm able to guarantee results, because it gets such great results for these people as individuals and as an organization.
You know, James, it's such an intuitive concept. It's just simply not done. The human element in bringing humanity back to the workplace, there is a big movement for it. I think people are craving it. As a matter of fact, team members, employees deeply crave this kind of more inclusive, and I think it would add more production. Oh, I don't think. No, it would. So it's so interesting that you've blended that production side with actually the softer personal development side.
Yeah. I've seen that with a lot of friends that I've had. I've seen that with my wife. I've seen that with the companies that I've worked for. I mean, they're relying on systems that are 50 years old that really didn't even work that well back then. Yeah. Yet it's just a dumb thing today. I mean, you need something that you can stand by. Like a lot of these solutions as well these days, it's something that's there as part of the organization forever. And I'm more the antithesis of that. I'm like, let me come in, work with the team for 30 days. That's it. We guarantee results. You will have new people at the end of it who will feel better than they have in years, possibly ever. And then you're on your way. You don't need me anymore. And then we can just move on to the next team or the next organization.
Well, it's just a really remarkable model. I'd like you to talk just a little bit about this win score. I know that I went through that and found it really fascinating. You briefly mentioned on the back end, but describe that just a little bit more, if you would.
The win score shows people how far away they're operating from their potential. So I ask people when I'm having a conversation about whether or not Win the Day is a fit for their organization, I ask them how far away do they feel like their teams are operating from their potential. And in some cases, it's sort of 60, 70, but the reality is it's usually around 50. And if you've got people on your team who are operating at 50% of their potential, this is a massive opportunity for you to be able to help those people. And the ones that I'm working with specifically are at the manager and executive level. And these people are typically aged between 30 years old and 50 years old. It means that those are the people who are likely to be married. They're likely to have kids, which means they've got a lot of stuff going on in their life, which means their relationship's going to be a little bit challenging with their spouse. Their physical health has fallen by the wayside. Their mental health is going to be struggling. Of course, they're feeling massively overwhelmed at work because of all these other factors. Yet these are the people in charge of driving and leading culture for these organizations. It's just a perfect storm for bad things to happen. So the win score shows how far away these people are operating from their potential. And that's just for the individual. That's not for the organization. Everything is strictly confidential. And then what we do is we have a team win score. And this is what the employer will receive. So we can find these anonymous insights to find out where your team is operating. And then we can set a goal working together to say, why don't we pull up that team win score by 20% within 30 days by focusing on these individual actions. I will lead one-on-one coaching for these people as well as group coaching to really hold their hand to give them that result. So it's really a high touch, high results model.
Such a beautiful model on those of you that are executives or leading teams. I'll just say as a seasoned business individual, I think that this is the soft stroke that makes all the difference in performance. I also want to really point out of how closely this aligns with the flow cycle. We have to have our individual life and our family life and those to actually manifest properly in the public setting. And so many of us run around out of flow focusing on that public setting. And so this is a restoration model. And it's one of the primary reasons I wanted to have James on the program is he has a mechanic, particularly for the business environment, to help individuals get into flow cycles, which will yield tremendous fruit for you. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's amazing work, and I'm so looking forward to see the great success. Anything else you'd like to share about that, James? And where would people find you, or how is the best way to reach out to you regarding that program?
Yeah, if you'd like to learn more, you can go to winner.day. So it's about the most concise URL that you can get. I saw that someone else has got winnerday.com, and they're sitting on that for a very expensive fee at the moment. So I went to winner.day, and that's just a great way of people being able to go and learn more a bit about what I do. And if you want to go and find out the 50 best tips out of the more than 600 people that I've interviewed over the years, you can go to winner.day/50 ways. I'll send you a link to that. We include that in the show notes. And that's just a free roadmap of the best tip, the 50 best tips that I've heard and how they align with the win score. So people can go and access those. And perhaps if you want to build a bit of momentum, to start following one at a time. And we've got amazing people like you in there as well. So yeah, it's a great resource for everyone to go and check out for free.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, James. So we'll make sure that we include the link in there so you can go directly to those two sites. So James, just what a thrill to be with you again. We always have just the most interesting conversations, and I love the depth of which you go. And just thank you for sharing your beautiful story. And I think giving encouragement for those. I think so often we all, we see individuals like yourself that have had incredible public persona success, but we fail to actually dig to the root of what made them there. And I'll say that the greatest people that I've met have had to overcome incredible dragons. So don't be afraid to face your fears first with reality and move toward what scares you the most. And let's just live in a calm, peaceful way. Let's calm the chaos. Let's operate in flow and get out of this choppy world we're in. And just such a thrill to be with you, James. And just thank you. Look forward to the next time you're on.
Yeah.
Everyone have a great day and look forward to seeing you on the next episode.